Ever wonder what's really running the show up there in your head? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and meet the overlooked, overworked, and absolutely essential support crew of your nervous system. Let's get to know them.
Okay, quick question. If I asked you to name the most important cell in your nervous system, what would you say? I'm betting you'd say the neuron. And look, that makes sense. Neurons are the superstars, right? They're the ones zapping out all the signals for our thoughts, our memories, everything we do. But what if I told you they're only part of the story, and maybe not even the biggest part?
Get this. For every single one of those superstar neurons, there are something like 10 other cells packed in there, working behind the scenes. We call them neuroglia, or just glial cells. The name literally means nerve glue, and for a long time, that's what scientists thought they were. Just stuff holding the important bits together. But oh, were we wrong. This glue is actually incredibly active and vital.
All right, so let's meet the team. We'll start at headquarters, the brain and spinal cord. You know, the central nervous system, or CNS. And in here, we've got 4 main types of these specialist glial cells, each with a super important job to do. First up, the astrocytes. Their name actually means star cell because, well, they're kind of star-shaped. And these guys are the most common glial cells in your brain by far. The best way to think of them? They're the ultimate managers. They do a little bit of everything to keep the whole operation running smoothly. And I'm not kidding when I say multitasking. I mean, look at this list. They give neurons physical support, like a scaffold. They form the super important blood-brain barrier. Think of it like a bouncer for your brain, deciding what gets in and what stays out. They're constantly tweaking the chemical balance, making sure ions are where they should be. They ferry nutrients from your blood to the neurons. And if there's an injury, they even help with repair and scarring. Yeah, they're busy. Okay, next up in the CNS crew, the oligodendrocytes. Now, if astrocytes are the managers, these guys are the expert electricians. Their whole job is about insulation. They wrap up the brain's wiring to make sure all those electrical signals travel super fast and don't get lost along the way. So what they do is they produce this fatty stuff called the myelin sheath, and they wrap it around the long tails of the neurons, the axons. And here's what's so cool about them. They're incredibly efficient. Just one single oligodendrocyte can reach out its arms and insulate parts of multiple different neurons all at the same time. And trust me, we're definitely going to talk more about why that myelin is such a game changer in a minute. All right, every command center needs security, right? Well, in your brain, that's the job of the microglia. These are the vigilant security guards, the brain's very own dedicated immune cells. They're always on patrol, looking for anything that shouldn't be there. You can think of them as the cleanup crew, or the scavengers of the CNS. The moment they sense trouble, like an injury, an infection, or even just old cells that need to be cleared out, they jump into action. They basically eat the debris. It's a process called phagocytosis. They are absolutely essential for keeping your brain tidy and healthy. And that brings us to our last member of the central crew, a real specialist, the ependymal cell. I like to call these the fluid engineers. Their job is all about managing the special liquid that your brain floats in. So you have these fluid-filled spaces in your brain and spinal cord, right? Well, these cells form the lining for those spaces. And from there, they help produce and circulate the cerebrospinal fluid, or CSF. What's really neat is they have these tiny little hairs called cilia that are constantly waving back and forth to keep that fluid moving. It's that fluid that cushions your brain and keeps it safe. Okay, so that's the crew at headquarters. But what about all the wires and cables that run from the CNS out to, well, everywhere else in your body? That's the peripheral nervous system, or PNS. And it has its own special 2-person support team out in the field. First up, we have Schwann cells. Now these guys are also electricians, just like the oligodendrocytes back in the CNS. Their job is also insulation, but they do it a little differently. They have a more dedicated one-on-one approach. So Schwann cells also make that fatty myelin sheath, but here's the big difference. A single Schwann cell dedicates itself entirely to just one tiny piece of one axon. It wraps its whole body around it. So to cover a whole nerve fiber, you need a whole bunch of Schwann cells all lined up in a row. It's also worth noting they're super important for helping nerves heal if they get damaged. And that brings us to the last member of our glial cell team, the satellite cells. Okay, remember how astrocytes were the managers back in the CNS? Well, think of satellite cells as personal bodyguards for the neurons out in the PNS.
So out in the peripheral system, the main bodies of the neurons are often clumped together in these little hubs called ganglia.
The satellite cells completely surround these neuron bodies, forming a protective bubble around them. From there, they give support and they carefully control the local environment, making sure that neuron has exactly what it needs to do its job.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about myelin, made by both our electricians, the oligodendrocytes, and the Schwann cells. But why? Why is this fatty insulation so incredibly important? Well, it all boils down to one simple thing: speed.
So how does this work exactly? Well, that myelin wrapping isn't a solid tube. There are these tiny little gaps in the insulation, and they're called nodes of Ranvier. So instead of the electrical signal having to slowly travel down the entire length of the nerve, it does something amazing. It literally jumps from one gap to the next. It's like skipping stones across a pond. This jumping process is called saltatory conduction, and it makes the signal travel unbelievably fast. It's a huge upgrade.
So let's just put our two myelin makers side by side one more time. In the central nervous system, you've got the oligodendrocytes, the efficient ones, reaching out to insulate many axons at once. Then, out in the peripheral nervous system, you've got the Schwann cells, the dedicated specialists, where one cell covers one tiny piece of one axon. Same goal, different locations, and a totally different way of getting it done.
Now, after meeting this incredible support crew, you can probably imagine what happens when things go wrong with them. If this crew starts to falter, the results can be really serious. In fact, problems with glial cells are at the heart of some major diseases.
And this is why it's so important for us to understand these cells. For example, when the oligodendrocytes in the brain and spinal cord are damaged, that can cause multiple sclerosis. When the Schwann cells out in the peripheral nerves are attacked by the immune system, that's linked to Guillain-Barré syndrome. And here's another thing. Unlike most neurons, glial cells can still divide and multiply, even in adults. And that unfortunately means they're the origin of most primary brain tumors, like the ones that come from astrocytes.
So, you see, there's so much more than just nerve glue. It's not even close. These are active, dynamic, absolutely essential players in everything your nervous system does. Every thought, every feeling, every movement, this crew is involved.
All right, let's do a final lightning round review. In the CNS, you've got your managers, the astrocytes, your electricians, the oligodendrocytes, your security team, the microglia, and your fluid engineers, the ependymal cells. Then, out in the PNS, you've got your dedicated insulators, the Schwann cells, and your personal bodyguards, the satellite cells. That's the whole team, the unsung heroes. So, the next time you have a thought, a memory, or just a quick reflex, stop and think for a second. Who are you going to thank? Just the star of the show, the neuron? Or are you going to give some credit to the entire incredible support crew that makes the whole show possible in the first place?